Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. My name is Christopher Hall. I'm a NASA mission specialist who began this mission on the International Space Station with the usual mindset of an astronaut, committed to science, exploration, and cooperation among nations. When I first arrived on the station, my biggest worries involved possible equipment failures, ensuring experiments ran on schedule, and looking forward to the day I could hug my parents again back in Florida. The thought of something like a zombie outbreak never crossed my mind. That scenario belonged in movies and strange conspiracy theories, not in an actual NASA mission. Yet here I am, recounting how I experienced the first 24 hours of a global crisis that people are calling the zombie outbreak. I arrived at the station a few weeks before everything changed, alongside a crew representing multiple space agencies. Because space travel requires international collaboration, we had an American commander named Martin Shaw, a veteran of several missions who kept a calm presence even under the most difficult circumstances. There was also flight engineer Yelena Volkova from Russia, known for her skill at docking cargo and cruise ships with precision. Dr. Helena Ortiz, a physician from the European Space Agency, monitored our health and addressed any medical needs we might have. Kenji Takahashi came from Japan's aerospace program, focusing on robotics and mechanical systems. Sarah Mitchell served as our main communications officer with ground control, adept at handling everything from routine transmissions to crisis-level communications. Then there was the newest cosmonaut, Nikolai Morozov, also from Russia, whose youthful enthusiasm carried him through each day. I rounded out the group, primarily assisting with scientific experiments, but trained to fill any gaps that arose. Before the outbreak, our routine was predictable. We woke in our small sleeping quarters, floated through cramped modules to check sensors and log data, exercised on specialized equipment, performed experiments on microgravity's effect on biology or materials, and exchanged status updates with mission control on Earth. We'd break for meals, mindful of how everything floated in microgravity, then continue our tasks until a scheduled bedtime that aligned with coordinated universal time. That sense of order and normality ended when our communications console picked up frantic voices from Houston, indicating that an unknown infection was spreading on Earth. At first, I heard only fragments. Words like violent behavior, collapse of social order, and medical crisis crackled through my headset in a voice so tense it felt alien. Sarah Mitchell, our communications officer, tried to calm everyone by explaining that we sometimes received partial transmissions when weather or technical glitches disrupted signals. This time, though, something felt different. When the phrase zombie-like infection appeared, I dismissed it as a possible code or a bizarre hoax. The line cut out soon after, leaving us in a bubble of uncertainty. We tried to call back, but the signals were sporadic. A wave of static replaced any official guidance. Within minutes, we scrambled to connect with other ground stations around the world. Yelena tried Moscow. Dr. Ortiz attempted to reach the European Space Agency in hopes of receiving some clarity. Kenji rotated through a series of frequencies, scanning for any consistent broadcast. The more we tried, the clearer it became that the entire planet was dealing with a rapid, disorienting event. Some channels played recordings of instructions for citizens to barricade themselves at home. Others were faint pleas for help. Even from orbit, we could see that entire cities had started to lose power, their usual glow dimming in patches. That was how it began. An eerie shift from everyday life to a nightmare scenario involving real zombies. I floated in one of the station's modules, tension sinking in as I listened to the last broken words from mission control. They couldn't contain the infection, and we were on our own. Commander Shaw took charge of the situation, instructing us to remain level-headed. He reminded everyone that our immediate safety on the ISS was secure. The infection, whatever form it took, couldn't float into space. Still, the implications of a planet-wide event were dire. We depended on Earth for fresh supplies, instructions, and the eventual trip home. If cities were truly dealing with hordes of infected individuals who resembled classic zombies, how would any ground crew maintain the rigorous schedule of rocket launches and ground tracking? As the hours passed, transmissions from NASA and other agencies dwindled to faint static, or short bursts of language we could barely decipher. We spent the early phases of that day methodically checking the station's core systems. The ISS is designed to be resilient. We have modules that handle life support, oxygen generation, carbon dioxide scrubbing, power from solar arrays, and water recycling. We also maintain a substantial stock of freeze-dried meals and other consumables. The fundamental question became how long we could sustain ourselves if ground control never returned to normal. Astronauts are trained for emergencies, including extended isolation, but none of our drills had involved a scenario where Earth might be in the midst of a zombie outbreak. The crew members coped in different ways. Commander Shaw kept an even tone, focusing on immediate tasks. In crisis situations, leadership often relies on unwavering calm to keep everyone focused. Dr. Ortiz tried to find any official data on the infection. She pieced together scraps of transmissions that mentioned aggression, rapid spread, and the transformation of infected people into something akin to the living dead. We all thought the same thing. How could something so fantastical be real? Kenji systematically recorded images of Earth from the station's external cameras, comparing them to older snapshots. He noticed entire urban regions dimming earlier than normal or appearing darker than we'd ever observed during standard Earth nights. Yelena, who had a young son in Moscow, worried incessantly. She asked me privately if I thought we'd ever go home to see our families again. I tried to reassure her, but fear weighed heavily on my mind too. In the midst of this, our cosmonaut, Nikolai Morozov, argued passionately that we had a responsibility to return to Earth and help. He envisioned using our training and resources to gather survivors, or at least to provide assistance wherever we landed. But the rest of the crew pointed out the overwhelming risks. We had no confirmation of safe zones or organized defenses against whatever was happening. Dropping into a hostile environment brimming with infected individuals could trap us in an even worse situation. Sarah Mitchell added that our role as astronauts included preserving the station. If Earth's infrastructure was failing, the ISS might end up being the last bastion of technology operating at full capacity for some time. The disagreement generated friction among us. Still, we recognized that no final decision could be made without more information. We each tried sending personal messages to our families. I spoke into a microphone, addressing my parents and telling them I hoped they were secure. Most of these messages probably never reached their intended recipients, because we were transmitting into a network that was crashing under the weight of global panic. Yet it felt important to say something, to acknowledge our loved ones and hope they would somehow receive our words. Yelena left a short video for her son, urging him to follow any official instructions and stay with relatives if possible. Nikolai frantically tried a separate frequency directed at friends in his hometown. Dr. Ortiz put on a brave face, offering advice in Spanish for anyone who might be listening, urging them to remain calm, protect themselves, and seek medical expertise. After we finished, the station felt more silent than usual. Our words floated out into the void, with no guarantee they would find a living ear. While all of this was happening, the earth beneath us continued to turn. Every so often, we'd spot unusual plumes of smoke or patches of darkness that shouldn't have been there. One night, I looked out the station's window and noticed something. An entire portion of a coastal region had gone dark. We later learned through a faint radio broadcast that the region lost power because a local power plant stopped functioning. The infected, or zombies, had overrun the area, causing employees to flee. Others tried to downplay the situation, but the repeated references to people turning unresponsive or violent made it impossible to dismiss. People on the ground were dealing with mass panic, blocked roads, and medical facilities unable to handle the surge of infected victims. The official word zombie cropped up more and more, which made my thoughts spin. Until that moment, it had been easy to label it a mere rumor or sensational description. Then we heard multiple recordings from different parts of the world, each describing the same unstoppable wave of infection, spread through bites or scratches. The infected apparently attacked any uninfected person on sight. There was no talk of a cure. We began to accept that this crisis was real. Commander Shaw pushed us to maintain a schedule, insisting it was vital for our mental health. We woke at designated times, completed exercise routines, checked station systems, and swapped updates. But we couldn't just carry on with normal experiments as if nothing was happening. Our priorities shifted. We needed to figure out how best to handle possible scenarios. A supply ship arriving at the ISS carrying infected individuals, a forced evacuation if the station suffered catastrophic failure, or a new directive from some remnant of governmental authority on Earth. The idea of an infected individual reaching us in space sounded outlandish. Yet in the chaos, it was possible that someone might attempt to launch an escape rocket to the station without proper health screening. We designated part of the station for quarantine if that ever happened, planning to seal off newcomers until Dr. Ortiz could confirm they weren't carrying the infection. She had only basic medical tools up here, certainly not the extensive lab needed to analyze a pathogen. Still, we decided it was better to have a plan than nothing. At one point, Kenji discovered faint signals that suggested a private American company was preparing some kind of emergency rocket launch. The details were unclear, possibly an automated schedule, or a real group trying to escape Earth. The message mentioned sending food and medicine to orbit, but provided no definite time frame. When we tried to reply, the channel fell silent. We had no way of knowing if it was an authentic effort or a ghost signal. It became a recurring theme, glimmers of hope flickering in the background, then fading into static. We clung to every faint promise that someone was still organized enough to mount a response. As tension mounted among us, conversations sometimes ended in raised voices. Nikolai insisted that staying in orbit was an act of cowardice. Yelena feared for her family so deeply that she teetered between wanting to leave and wanting to remain safe. Sarah Mitchell, feeling the weight of her communication duties, kept reminding everyone we needed real data before making drastic choices. Commander Shaw kept the peace, distributing tasks that forced us to collaborate. Dr. Ortiz tried to serve as a voice of reason, though her own worry for loved ones seeped into her demeanor. Watching everyone wrestle with fear and guilt was as unsettling as the outbreak itself. Our environment required cooperation to survive. Space does not forgive prolonged conflict, yet the emotional strain was like nothing we had trained for. During moments of calm, I roamed the station's modules, double-checking the water recycling system and the oxygen generators. The knowledge that we might be the only functioning human habitat left without infected individuals felt overwhelming. In the back of my mind, I asked myself the unthinkable. Were we witnessing the end of our civilization from an orbiting vantage point? Drifting 250 miles above Earth, we had the best panoramic seat to a global downfall that we were powerless to stop. Small impacts of cosmic debris or station vibrations, which were once routine, became sources of anxiety. Any unusual thump or rattle along the hull made us jump. One time we heard a faint knock-like sound that no one could explain. We spent hours scanning external cameras and reading sensor data to ensure nothing tried to dock with us unannounced. We found no signs of an approaching craft, so we had to conclude it was just a random piece of space junk that brushed our shielding. Under normal circumstances, we would note it in our logs and continue on. Now, every unknown stimulus fueled our paranoia. Sarah caught a snippet of radio chatter involving an unconfirmed safe zone. We couldn't determine its location precisely, but the voice mentioned a desert region far from major cities. This ignited another round of fierce debate. Should we plan a targeted landing near that location, hoping to find survivors? The problem was that we lacked details about the runway, local topography, or whether the area was truly free of zombies. Descending blindly could end with us in the middle of an infested region or a crash landing if there were no ground crews to help us secure a landing site. We tested potential flight paths and re-entry schedules, but too many variables remained unknown. When we tried to reach NASA's flight director, we once again heard frantic partial transmissions, implying that every effort to contain the infection was failing. Some government agencies were retreating to remote bunkers or cutting off transport routes. Military responses existed, but they were overwhelmed by large crowds of infected. Most of these crowd movements jammed highways. Some transmissions even suggested that entire hospitals had become infection clusters, with infected staff wandering the halls. We heard the word zombies repeated on official channels, which removed any last shred of doubt about how people on Earth were framing this crisis. In the lull between these distress calls, we stared down at Earth through the station's windows. Sweeping arcs of lights that once defined major cities disappeared. We began to see more unlit patches as power grids failed or were deliberately shut down. From our orbital perspective, large wildfires in certain regions burned unchecked, visible as orange glows shimmering beneath thick plumes of smoke. That told us firefighting efforts were compromised. The planet's usual hum of life and technology was sputtering, like a candle on the verge of going out. By the time we neared what we believed to be the 24-hour mark since the initial frantic call, an unspoken understanding formed. The Earth we'd known was gone, at least temporarily. Millions of people might be in grave danger or already infected. Nobody had the resources or coordination to mount a global defense. Some small enclaves of survivors were surely holding out, but we lacked a definitive plan for how we, from our perch in orbit, could assist them. Most of us felt a profound sorrow, knowing our families could be among those survivors, or worse, could be trapped in infected zones. Yet, short of a dangerous descent, we had no viable path to intervene. Commander Shaw eventually gathered us in the Unity module, the heart of the station, to summarize our position. We had enough food and essential supplies to remain in orbit for weeks without immediate resupply. We had partial power from the station's solar arrays, no major mechanical failures, and a functional air and water recycling system. Our communications gear could still pick up random signals from Earth, though they were becoming scarcer. If things stabilized and a ground team signaled us with a safe landing procedure, we could re-enter the atmosphere. If not, we might have no choice but to remain aloft for as long as possible. It was a bleak reality, one that weighed on each of us in different ways. I recall floating near a window after that briefing, looking at the curve of the planet. It looked placid, covered in a gentle swirl of clouds and brilliant blue oceans. That image contrasted sharply with the chaos described on the radio transmissions. The sense of dissonance was staggering. Below the clouds might be entire cities infested with people who had lost their humanity. The nightmares of countless horror stories had become a living phenomenon, yet from space, it all seemed hidden behind layers of atmosphere. Part of me hoped that perhaps the chaos would burn out quickly, that the world's governments would coordinate a response, or that a cure might be discovered. Another part of me feared that we were glimpsing civilization's final hours. Sleep became more and more difficult, despite the fact that fatigue eventually overtook us. Each of us took shifts monitoring the communication console and the station's critical systems. In off hours, I tried to rest in my sleeping bag, which is strapped to the wall to keep me from drifting. My thoughts never fully settled. I felt like a prisoner of my own mind, imagining scenes of loved ones trapped, hearing the word zombies echo over and over in my head. Once I dreamed of being back on Earth, only to be surrounded by infected crowds. I woke up in a sweatless panic, confronted by weightlessness and a faint hum of station fans. Reality itself had become surreal. Disagreements continued to flare. Nikolai remained upset at the notion of staying in orbit, while Earth burns, as he put it. Yelena fixated on the welfare of her family, torn between wanting to help them and knowing that an unplanned descent into a conflict zone could end in disaster for our entire crew. Dr. Ortiz tried to maintain a clinical approach, reminding everyone that survival in space required strict discipline and that risking ourselves without a clear objective would accomplish nothing. Commander Shaw repeated that we couldn't make an emotional decision. Kenji kept scanning Earth with the cameras, methodically documenting the changing state of the planet in the hope that one day people might piece together how it all unraveled. As we reached the final minutes of that first full day, it dawned on us that we had, in our own way, survived something monumental. Although we weren't physically threatened by the infected, we experienced the emotional toll of witnessing our home world collapse into confusion. We floated in a safe haven, which ironically felt more like a coffin drifting in orbit if the situation down below was truly hopeless. Yet we tried to bolster each other's spirits. The station, after all, was a testament to human cooperation and ingenuity. If we could maintain our unity, maybe that spirit could endure, even in the face of something as overwhelming as a zombie outbreak. I made a personal log entry just after we clicked through what we called the 24-hour mark. I admitted my fear, but also expressed a cautious kind of determination. If Earth truly needed time to stabilize, the station might be humanity's backup plan, a place to keep scientific knowledge intact, or to wait until we could land safely. I told my recorder that I hoped future generations, those who might rebuild after the crisis, would learn from our vantage point and ensure nothing like this happened again. Commander Shaw brought us all together in one of the station's modules as we approached the end of that first day, his expression a mixture of resolve and sorrow. The gentle edge in his voice was something I'd never quite heard from him before. He acknowledged how unthinkable our new situation had become, a planet engulfed by a zombie outbreak while we orbited above in a fragile sanctuary. Slowly, he explained that if there was any workable plan, anything at all that would bring us home safely, we would commit to it without hesitation. But until reliable intel reached us, until we had even a shred of proof that the undead threat on Earth was being contained, we would remain in orbit. We would do what we had been trained to do: protect the station's systems, monitor the planet below, and support one another through every creeping moment of uncertainty. No one argued with him. In that moment, the urgency of simply staying sane and functional in orbit overshadowed every personal desire to rush back to a homeworld spinning out of control. We floated together in an awkward silence that felt heavier than gravity itself, if such a thing were possible in microgravity. Yelena kept her arms folded tightly across her torso, head bowed as she thought about her family back in Moscow. Nikolai, who had spent much of the day insisting we should descend to help, averted his eyes in a gesture that spoke of resignation and fear. Dr. Ortiz maintained her medical composure, but you could see the weariness pulling at her features. Kenji fiddled with the corner of a handhold, his mind likely on the next camera sweeps he'd perform to track power losses below. Sarah just took a long, slow breath. As for me, I gripped a nearby support rail, feeling an odd pressure behind my eyes that I refused to let turn into tears. All of us understood that words like zombie and infection usually belonged to fiction, but we had already heard them repeated in broken radio signals from around the world. We had glimpsed entire city grids going dark at a pace no natural disaster could match. We caught fragments of official broadcasts, instructions to barricade doors, final pleas from those who feared they wouldn't see the next sunrise. None of it felt real, yet the proof was undeniable. So we clung to our commander's quiet confidence, because we had little else to guide us. His speech ended with a reminder that, no matter how hopeless the planet's chaos might seem, we were still human beings, bound by a duty to reason and compassion. If we gave up, if we let the atmosphere of dread erode our unity, the station, and perhaps our last vestige of civilization, would crumble. Those words gave me a flicker of reassurance. They reminded me that from the dawn of spaceflight to this strange moment of cosmic isolation, cooperation had always been our greatest strength. Our spacecraft, our missions, our ability to see Earth from above, it all came from humanity working together to overcome the impossible. Even a zombie outbreak could not erase that history of resilience. That night, or what passed for night in the station's artificial day, we listened to the gentle hum of machinery. It was a quiet background noise of life support systems cycling the air. The sense of normalcy it once offered had become a stark contrast to the horrors below. Each one of us was lost in private thoughts of family members and friends who might now be scattered, hiding, or possibly among the infected. I tried to imagine the shape of my parents' neighborhood in Florida, wondering if it was still intact, or if it had been overrun. The unknowns swelled like a tidal wave in my mind. Yet there was no place to hide from them inside our tiny orbital outpost. Survival in these circumstances became more than just staying alive. It turned into a duty to preserve what makes us human: curiosity, empathy, and the commitment to keep hope alive. The station represented years of international trust, every bolt and panel a testament to humankind's capacity for unity. Now it was an ark, floating at the edge of a global disaster that none of us fully understood. We harbored no illusions that things might bounce back in a matter of days. Transmission after transmission spelled out a planet in disarray, entire continents grappling with the undead. Governments were struggling to remain functional, and countless people were stranded or on the move. Even if the outbreak slowed, the damage already done was staggering. Over the following days, tension gnawed at us like a slow, ceaseless current. Every time we made contact with a station on Earth, the conversation was fraught with uncertainty. Some regions seemed to cling to basic order, but others had descended into chaos, their power grids fractured and public services collapsed. We confirmed that large cities across multiple time zones were going dark, possibly due to sabotage, neglect, or desperate attempts to isolate infected areas. The reality sank in that each lost power grid meant thousands, maybe millions more people cut off from coordinated support. The psychological strain soon proved just as tangible as any physical danger. Kenji began mapping out a pattern of blackouts, labeling them on the station's console in red blocks that seemed to grow larger each day. Elena drifted to quieter corners of the station whenever she wasn't on duty, whispering prayers for her family. Nikolai's restless energy would drive him to continuously recheck the docking ports and the Soyuz spacecraft that could carry us back to Earth, as though he might uncover new data that would make a descent feasible. Dr. Ortiz spent her free time reviewing and re-reviewing the slim medical resources aboard, determined to keep us healthy in this vacuum of uncertainty. Sarah Mitchell scanned frequency after frequency, recording every fragment of communication. Sometimes all she heard was static, but now and then she'd pick up a frantic voice or a coded signal that hinted at a cluster of survivors. None ever lasted long enough to give us a full picture. No matter how disheartening the day's findings became, Commander Shaw would sit us down each evening and remind us of our mission. Stay operational, stay vigilant, and help each other adapt to this new reality. It wasn't the typical mission statement you'd expect from NASA, but it was the one we needed. Maintaining the station's technology was a practical goal we could handle, a means to fight the creeping despair that might otherwise consume us. Each test of our water recycling system or inspection of the solar panels felt like an act of defiance against the chaos below. We were still here, still looking down at Earth, still refusing to turn our backs on the possibility that recovery was somewhere on the horizon. Those first 24 hours remain etched into my mind because they represent the raw shock of witnessing the transformation of our world from a tranquil sphere to a place of fear and roaming zombies. One day, we were discussing routine supply missions and research objectives. The next, we were listening to broken pleas from a population that had no defense against a relentless, infection-driven threat. Everything that followed, the dwindling power grids, the patchwork signals, the moral debates about whether we should land, felt like a direct extension of the choices we made in that first day. We had decided, collectively, that we would not throw ourselves into catastrophe without a plan. Yet we also pledged we would never stop searching for a chance to help. Even now, replaying those early hours in my thoughts, I grasp how those decisions defined our fate as much as the outbreak itself. if any part of my story has reached you, if you're alive on the surface listening to these words, or if you're part of a future civilization rebuilding from the ashes, I hope you understand that we did not remain aloof by choice. Every hour, we weighed the risk of descending into the unknown against the tiny glimmers of hope that Earth might rally. Maybe a cure would emerge, or maybe a well-coordinated response would turn the tide. No one wanted to believe that we were witnessing the last days of modern society. Our greatest fear wasn't just the zombies, but the loss of our collective humanity. The International Space Station became more than a research platform. It turned into a small fortress of human perseverance, a reminder that we once looked to the stars and believed in progress. That fortress, however, could also become our tomb if things worsened and we found ourselves cut off forever. The thought weighed on each of us differently. For me, it sharpened my sense of responsibility to record what was happening, to keep track of every detail so that if Earth eventually stabilized, our account might serve as a testament to the ordeal. Perhaps it could even guide future policy or scientific inquiry. For others, it fueled the drive to maintain every valve and circuit in the station, to ensure no preventable failure stole our lives in the silence of orbit. When I think about that final moment of the first 24 hours, the moment Commander Shaw finished speaking, I recall the fragile unity we forged in the face of chaos. Each face reflected an overwhelming mix of fear and a stubborn dedication to endure. The station's corridors were cramped and the hum of circulating air always present, but in that instant, it felt like the only place in the universe. Beneath us, a planet known for bustling life had become an uncertain landscape ruled by the living dead. Above us, an endless stretch of vacuum offered neither sanctuary nor threat, just the indifferent backdrop of space. That is how we closed that chapter. Afloat in an orbital refuge, acknowledging an unthinkable reality below. We had no illusions about a swift resolution. In times like these, survival isn't guaranteed. Instead, it hinges on small choices. How well you hold on to hope, how carefully you plan, and how fiercely you commit to protecting one another. That was, and still is, our stance. Even if the planet was overtaken by zombies, even if entire countries were cut off, we would remember that we are creatures capable of courage and reason. We might be in orbit, but we remained part of humanity, and we owed it to everyone on Earth to carry that torch forward. Soon afterward, we witnessed new horrors on our camera feeds. Whole cities blacked out, areas engulfed in flames. We picked up frantic calls from pockets of survivors, attempting to form enclaves, only for the signals to break. Days blurred together, overshadowed by the knowledge that each passing hour brought more uncertainty to the world below. And yet, the recollection of those initial 24 hours never left us. It was then that our mission changed forever, shifting from scientific endeavors to a day-by-day fight to keep our orbiting station alive, and by extension, keep a small piece of civilized effort floating above the infected chaos. If you are hearing these words, somehow in some future or present I can't fully comprehend, then know this: we did not give up. We spent those first tense, anguished hours pooling our intellect, training, and empathy. We recognized that the most fundamental aspects of being human, solidarity, resourcefulness, compassion, were still within our grasp. We intended to cling to them for as long as we had breathable air and functioning tools. The undead could roam every street of every city, but they could not steal the ideals we carried into space. In the end, that is what makes us who we are. We survived that first day. We survived the searing realization that the world had changed in ways beyond any astronaut's training manual. The contradictions still haunt me, safe in orbit, but forever tied to a planet that might no longer be safe at all. If civilization one day stands again on firm ground, I hope our story survives as a testament to what humanity can endure. Until then, this is Christopher Hall, mission specialist aboard the International Space Station, sending a voice into the darkness, with a wish that someone hears it and understands that there was hope, even in the face of an outbreak that defied everything we knew. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.